Smart EQ's LinkedIn Live series, Emotional Intelligence for Your Everyday Life. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from, so go ahead and in the comments section, just drop a little note as to where you're calling in from around the world, because we know the last couple of times we've seen people from everywhere. While everybody's starting to do that, why don't we see where all of us are from? Maggie, where are you in from?
Yeah, I'm joining from our headquarters, San Diego, California.
Nice. How's the weather there, by the way?
It's actually rainy, so that is rare for us. It's a very exciting weather event.
Wow. Greg, where are you in from?
First, Maggie, how is your emotions when you experience rain
That's right.
in San Diego that you never get?
I actually really enjoy it. The change in weather is wonderful. So thank you for asking. Feeling very happy about it.
Well, welcome everybody. And I am joining you all from Dallas, Texas. And it is nice here. No humidity, in the 70s. So really beautiful today.
Nice. And I'm actually from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we have a beautiful day on hand, a very odd one for us in November. It's going up to like 70 today. I see we have somebody from Chicago and Wendy in north of Pittsburgh, from Fremont, Nebraska, and Detroit, Indiana, sunny New Jersey. I wonder if that means it's actually sunny or that's the name of it. But welcome, everybody. Keep telling us where you're from. I'm really excited about today's event because I'm actually switching seats. I'm going to be turning this over just a minute to Maggie Sass, who is EVP of Applied Research here at TalentSmart, to be our moderator. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, TalentSmart is the world's premier provider of emotional intelligence assessments and programs around the world. We actually help individuals, teams, and organizations use emotional intelligence to solve organizational challenges, maximize the strengths of their teams, and also we help people become just more satisfied and effective at work. And let me also add, this will also help you with your personal lives as well. We are based in San Diego, as Maggie pointed out. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Maggie to take over.
Perfect. Thanks, David. So thrilled to be back in the moderating role to talk about the real deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I have Greg and David with me, who are two people who have extensive DEI work experience in addition to their expertise in emotional intelligence. So David, who you all just met, is one of the directors of training here at TalentSmart, has a real passion for DEI efforts for quite some time. He'll tell you more about that. Prior to joining TalentSmart, David worked with a large national retailer where he started the LGBTQ employee resource group. After working closely with the LGBT Chamber of Commerce, David received his DEI certification from the University of South Florida. Also with us is TalentSmart's VP of Law Enforcement and Government, Dr. Greg Campbell, who received his DEI certification from Cornell University. And he's got experience leading and training enterprise-wide DEI programs in the government and private sector. So before we jump into this conversation, I want to do two things. So I want to take a minute to just set the stage for this conversation by sharing a little bit about who we are. So like I said, my name is Maggie Sass. I'm a white, cisgender, straight, able woman from California, actually born and raised in San Diego, which is pretty rare. And I've been back here for over a decade. But I'm also a UC Berkeley alum, go Bears. I'm extroverted from a personality perspective. I have a PhD and I'm married with a 2-year-old. David, what about you?
Absolutely. So I am a gay white man, and I also am a senior citizen with a hidden disability, college educated, born and raised in Pittsburgh, but I had moved all over the country for about 20 years here in the US, and back in Pittsburgh now for about a decade and a half. And no children, but I do have an amazing dog that is like my daughter. Greg, how about you?
All right, thanks, David. So an African-American male, cisgender, straight man from California, born and raised in the Los Angeles area, actually specifically Compton, California, and currently reside, as I told you earlier, in Dallas, Texas. I've lived in several states as a result of being a federal agent for 27 years. And I saw Tracy Jackson Hall on from Detroit, worked in Detroit. And Tracy, I'll be in Detroit training in EQ in January. So I saw you there and just wanted to call that out. Not that I'm omitting anybody else, but that Detroit sticks out to me. Had a wonderful time living in Detroit. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, been married 31 years. I have a daughter who's an educator. She's 26 years old, a son who's 23. Just graduated from Baylor University. The other Bears, go Bears. Sick 'em Bears, Maggie. And just love working, have a PhD, love working in the leadership and management space. So
awesome, thanks. So just to level set, we are clearly three people coming to this conversation with our own unique lenses and experiences and biases because of who we are and of how the world sees us through some of those identities or labels. And I think it's important for us to normalize the fact that the discussion around DEI is complicated, it's multifaceted, and our perspective is that these conversations can be hard or uncomfortable. For many people, they produce emotional responses. And I think it's my bias that if you're doing them well, if you're having these conversations well, they probably should be hard. Mm-hmm. The trick is not in making them less hard or less uncomfortable, but in really educating and equipping people on how and why to stay in the conversations, even when they're hard, so that they can get better. And our perspective at Talent Smart is that emotional intelligence is really the cornerstone. It's a requirement in many ways for that work to work for individuals and for organizations. Mm-hmm. So for those of you listening, I'm curious what identities or dimensions of diversity are important to you. So if you're so inclined, feel free to drop any of those into the chat. Before we really dive in, though, David and Greg, when we first jumped on this call, when we were prepping before we went live, we talked about some of the energy we each had about this conversation. And I wonder if you might just share a little bit about what's going on for you.
Yeah, I'll start off. It was interesting because I thought maybe I was the only one, but I had kind of butterflies of emotions as I was getting ready for today, because I think a couple of things. First of all, the topic of DE&I is extremely important, I think, to everybody. But for me, it's been a journey for quite some time. And I think the other thing is that every time I started thinking about what we were going to try and share with everybody that's joining us is there's really not an absolute right or wrong. And so I think I was trying too hard to think about how to say the right thing. And I think that's what was making me a little bit nervous, is because this is really that journey of grayness. And so it's about being able to just have the conversation. I think that's the biggest reason that I was having that. And I was happy to hear that the two of you were on the same page.
Yeah. Well, thank you, David and Maggie, for giving me an opportunity to share. And I speak, this is what I do for a living. I get up every day. I'm so fortunate to be able to do what I love, which is training and EQ and leadership and speaking to people and doing keynotes. So it's not something that is uncommon. But today I felt just some butterflies and some nerves. And here's why I think so, because DEI is so important to me. And I believe you or individuals can do more harm than good in an organization. So I take it serious. And then oftentimes when things come out of individuals' mouths and you throw out individual certifications or their degrees and their diversity that they bring to the table, people can walk away and see it as truth or gospel, rather than what Maggie laid out earlier is it's our lens. It's just sort of our perspective, what we're going to be sharing with you all today. So please, as we are sharing, diversity is not a destination. DEI is not a destination. It's a journey. And I'm going to maybe say that a few more times today, just so that I bring my nerves down, but also that you walk away saying, what is your lens? And whatever your lens is, it's okay. And just to have more conversations, even if they're difficult conversations. So thank you, Maggie.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what you both shared. I think for me too, it's, we're going to have this conversation for 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And I think there are some perspectives that we're going to share that could be helpful. I think there are some conversation starters for wherever you are in your personal DEI journey or your organizational DEI journey. But I think we can only do justice of 45 minutes worth. And I think for me, that was what I was feeling the weight of is I know this is not a static thing that you check the box and it's done. And at the same time, I would just want to make sure that this is as value add as possible for people. So with that, let's jump in. So I'm going to turn it over to you first, Greg. So the initialism of DEI that's often used might give some people sort of a false optic that it's a single thing, that it's one thing, right? So in your words, what's a high level definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace?
Yes, thank you, Maggie. Through my lens, diversity is an appreciation, respect, value of similarities and differences that represent a broad range of backgrounds across race, sex, age, sexual orientation, physical abilities. So in essence, I want to put the emphasis on similarities and differences. That's sort of that little nuance. Sometimes when we think of diversity, it's always our differences, but it's also our similarities. So I'll stop there with that one. Equity is one of my favorites. And it's probably one of the terms in the acronym that's most misunderstood. But equity is ensuring that all individuals have what they need to succeed and participate fully, accounting for different access to opportunities, status, and rights. And we put a visual up on the screen for those who are visual learners like me. If we were going to a baseball game, it's depending on what you bring to the gate, we need to make sure you have access to see the game so that we can all experience the game in our own ways. So wonderful visual here. I love showing this visual when I'm teaching. And then finally, inclusion. Inclusion is about the collective. It's about creating a culture that strives for equity and embraces, respects, and accepts and values differences and similarities. It also enables individuals and groups to feel safe, respected, engaged, motivated, and valued for who they are and for their contributions toward organizational and societal goals.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's interesting. So each of those components are sort of interdependent. So they are related to one another, but definitely distinct. Verna Myers describes this, and I'm sort of a metaphor learner, but describes it as diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So, inclusion is really about leveraging the diversity so that it can be both celebrated, but then also leveraged so that you have full participation from people and optimum performance in an organization. I think equity might be, a constant and consistent shift in the party planning committee, right? So that you've got different people that are bringing different identities and experiences to think about, what that really looks like over time.
Maggie, can I give you another one
Please.
that I love for equity as well? A good example is not just giving everyone a shoe, but it's giving everyone a shoe that fits.
Yeah.
That's equity.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's great.
David, why is this important? What is it about having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace that is really important, both to individuals and to organizations?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think just hearing those definitions help to really kind of level set really what are we talking about. And so for me, when I think about the importance of it, especially in a workplace, there's like three areas. First and foremost, it's about your employees. And I think about when employees know that there is a DEI strategy, a mission, there's a vision about what the organization has, that employees themselves feel like they can be themselves when they come to work. It's that term we hear always about, can I be my true authentic self no matter who I am? And being able to be that allows me then to have energy to actually be productive. And so I think from an employee perspective, it's really important, because if we don't feel that there is something there to make us safe as employees, we probably don't bring ourselves. And I can say factually for myself, there's been oftentimes, not lately, not in the last decade, by the way, but prior to that, I didn't bring myself to work fully. So my thoughts and my ideas didn't actually get brought to the table. The second area is for the organization itself, because it's about getting different perspectives and hearing different voices. And why do people think and act and have behaviors the way they are? And so I think about a group of people sitting around a table, that when you have some different viewpoints that are also from diverse backgrounds, you're going to hear things that you would not normally have heard if you just had one particular group around. So an organization could benefit from that immensely. But then the third area is the clients and the community. So like, depending on what you do as an organization, and I'll think about my background is a lot in restaurants and retail. And so the clients are so important to understand. What is your opinion about DE&I in the workplace? Like, how do you treat your employees, and how are you coming off? Because so many people will go and support organizations that are being very inclusive and equitable, but you've also seen the same thing in the past where some people will choose to not do business with an organization because of a lack of that as well. So I think it's that threefold: employees, organizations, and then the community and clients around it too.
Yeah, thanks. I love what you said too about organizations having different opinions about DEI. We got a comment in the chat from Ryan who said, relative to the visual that you shared, Greg, that he's heard conversations in the past along the lines of let's spend our time finding ways to remove the fence rather than thinking about how you create ways for people to see over. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So Ryan, first of all, thank you for putting that in the chat. And I'm gonna, Maggie didn't state it, but she's actually my boss, and I love working with her. And she always asks such good questions. And I want to use one of her terms here for you, Ryan. I like what you said. I would love to spend time removing the fence and having those boxes so that people, while the fence is being torn down, we still need the boxes. So it's not an or, an either or, it's an and I'm seeing that across a number of organizations. Matter of fact, I applaud organizations who are starting wherever they are in the DEI space. So there may be organizations on this call, you have nothing going in the DEI space. Start somewhere. Start tearing down the fence.
Yeah.
There may be others on this call where you have values, you have a committee, you have employee resource groups you're doing, but you're still tearing down the fence. Here's why. Because DEI is not a destination, it's a journey. So even though we may tear down one fence, Ryan, there's always fences. And so it's a journey. But I love working on the fence and providing the boxes at the same time where needed in an organization.
Yeah. I love what you said about that there are multiple fences. You're going to tear down one fence and find additional fences that maybe are in blind spots to individuals or to the organization itself. The other thing too is, and we don't have as much time to get into this conversation today, but the fence in many ways represents sort of the structural challenges and policy challenges. And I think there's a both and around what needs to happen sort of at the top of an organization in terms of the systems that are in place that either help DEI or get in its way. And I think there's also what is in the sort of locus of control of individuals to do right now. And I think it's a both and, it's a top down and bottom up approach that I think in a lot of ways and with a lot of the clients that we work with presents a lot of empowerment to employees to think, I can start now, I can start with me, I can start with our group. And I think that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about later on in this conversation. So I know you've both worked in the corporate world, and for you, Greg, you've also spent a significant portion of your career in law enforcement and government. So let me ask you both where you see emotional intelligence being part of elevating DEI initiatives in a place of work. So David, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I really think the awareness aspects of both competences that we deal with in emotional intelligence. So social awareness really, I think, stands out for me as that place of really understanding the full identity of your organization. So at a workplace, understanding who's in our organization and are we representing them properly? Are they getting what they need from a standpoint of from any part of the inclusion and being equitable too? So I think that when we're not even understanding who we're working with, that's the place to start in the social awareness. So it's kind of chipping away at understanding what's below the surface, trying to have some empathy about if we are missing the boat somewhere, to be able to kind of step back to say, how can we meet those needs? But the other place becomes, for me, the self-awareness aspect, because sometimes I think people don't have those conversations because of their own challenges to have them. And I think sometimes we see organizations, so I've worked with organizations who have been around for decades and just started having the DEI conversation because perhaps leadership in the past found it uncomfortable. And instead of trying to approach their own self-awareness of why are we unwilling to have a conversation, they just put it on the side, which then made the organization probably not as healthy as it absolutely could have. So I really think that there's those two awareness pieces are so very important with that.
Yeah, I love that. I think to your point, I think for me, DEI absolutely starts with self-awareness, because that is this thing that you can focus on no matter what is happening around you. And, that's a foundational skill of emotional intelligence. When you can sort of put your energy towards developing the skill to process and manage differences. So we talked about, similarities and differences, but being aware of those enough so that you can understand your reactions to other people and situations. I think that's really helpful. We talk about this all the time. Some of the strategies that come from our book and from the program, things like, know who and what pushes your buttons, or spending time visiting your values and understanding what is it that sort of makes you tick. What's your worldview? What are these lenses through which you look at the world? Watching yourself like a hawk, all of those strategies, all of those behaviors that are essential in building high EQ are also the cornerstone pieces of building this self-awareness capability that allows for DEI to really sprout.
Yeah, if I could just add really quick, when you said about visiting values, so I just had a class not too long ago, and we had a robust conversation about when you visit your values, sometimes you're unhappy with what you discover. When you especially get to the topic of DE&I, because all of a sudden biases come up within yourself and you're all of a sudden like, wow, I don't think I realized that I had a bias there. Is that the reason why I'm having a challenge having the conversation? So I would like to say another one of our strategies, lean into your discomfort of that to discover where's that coming from. That becomes such a healthy conversation with yourself if you want to actually be able to embrace others who aren't like you. And I think that's a great self-awareness component of just that whole piece.
Yeah, love that. Greg, what about you?
I love both of those skills that you all talked about. I love all four of the EQ skills as it relates to DEI. But I want to give you just some real world examples since we're keeping it real, talking about DEI. So when I'm thinking about law enforcement, and I'm talking to law enforcement departments about DEI, I want to point out social awareness. So think about me working at in a law enforcement agency, and I'm with my brothers and sisters within that department, and they know me, and they treat me a certain way because I'm one of them. But what I love to share with police departments is my experience serving 27 years in federal law enforcement as a federal agent. When I left work and I'm in my undercover vehicle, whether it's a Camaro, a Mustang, or a GT, and I'm driving through another community and those officers don't know me, and then I get pulled over, guess what I experience? I experience what the typical African-American male has to do until that officer gets up into my car, my window, and then understand what's above the water line. Oh, I'm a federal agent. I'm driving a law enforcement vehicle. I got lights and sirens on this undercover vehicle. But until then, there's nervousness. And so just to have that conversation with my own peers working in law enforcement or with other departments as I go to departments now. Just another quick example, a friend of mine who's still in law enforcement called me, and they did a major raid a few weeks ago, and they arrested 80 something people. Did 80 simultaneous search warrants. Well, by the time they got down to the last group of people they were going to arrest, well, phone calls had been made and the people knew that they were coming. Well, they went up to one door and they were using a ruse to get individuals out of the house to be as safe as they could. And they knew this particular person was a large gentleman, just looking at the exterior factors. And the gentleman came to the door. He says, I already got the call that y'all are coming to get me. He said, will you please just not arrest me in front of my children? Wow. Yeah. From a law enforcement standpoint, social awareness, just understanding if I could just let a person be away from their children, or, you know, a male or a female being away from her children being arrested. It's just little things like that. Social awareness matters. All of the skills matter. But that's just one example or two examples of myself and then someone else experiencing how social awareness impacts community policing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love those real world examples. David and Greg, so you're both part of the team here at TalentSmart, who's sort of evolving our own company DEI strategy and messaging. And I'm curious, in your opinion, how EQ has helped, or where you're seeing EQ coming into play in the discussions of that group. David, what about you?
Yeah, you know, it's no different than what I said before. I mean, we are really kind of pulling on both our own self-awareness, but also social awareness. You know, we've had to have some uncomfortable conversations along the way. And even though we are an organization that is dedicated to EQ, we're also individuals that have our own thoughts and beliefs and biases. And so we've had to be able to pull back some of the layers and have some conversations that were a little uncomfortable, challenge each other. And also, I think, kind of understand the disconnects that maybe we didn't even realize we were having. And so it's been a process that I think is probably taking us a little longer than I think some of us maybe thought it would take, but in a good way, because we've slowed down to have the difficult conversations and challenge each other on some of the things that we're talking about. And so I'm liking that we're using our own recipe, if you will, of bringing social awareness and self-awareness into that play, because we want to get it right. And so kind of like what Greg said before, there's not a destination. Let's take this on a journey and have the conversation to do it right.
Real quick before I go to you, Greg, David, so you mentioned, you know, there's been some hard conversations, some uncomfortability. I'm curious for you, what is it that you've used? What EQ have you used to help yourself in those dialogues?
Yeah, great question, because I have had to use some for myself. So I've literally had to even do from a self-management perspective. I've had to do the ubiquitous count to 10 a couple of times, because I've heard somebody say something and I'm like, really? And I thought, okay, just because they work here doesn't mean that they have the same viewpoint as I do. And even though they've been supportive of maybe things that I brought to the table. So I've done that. I've definitely had to visit my own values too, a little bit too, just to understand, I come from, especially my, diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of what I've worked with is with the LGBTQ community. And I happen to be the only person in our organization that identifies that way. So I don't really have somebody else in the company to chat with about, like, what's your view on this? Or so for me, I've had to be able to pull back a couple of times to realize this isn't about me. It's about the bigger conversation of DE&I. So those have been a couple that I've done. And I've also slept on it, by the way. That's another one of our self-management ones, is allowing myself to say, don't speak right now, because you need to be able to understand what they're saying and why they're saying it. So those have been a few that I've used along the way.
Yeah. Greg, what about you?
So this is just too good. 45 minutes is not enough, So here's what I'll just say. There's a saying, a common saying, practice what you preach. And I think what we've been trying to do at TalentSmart is preach what we practice. Because our last meeting, as you all know, we had an agenda. Our committee coordinator had an agenda, and we didn't touch it at all.
Right.
And we just had an opportunity to share, and we moved away from the agenda. And there were some things going on in society, things going on with LA, with the city council in LA, and that secret. And I'm from Los Angeles, so it's important to me. And so we just talked about it. and we didn't get to our agenda, and we said, guess what? It's okay. We'll get to it next time. So I love preaching what you practice and also practicing what you preach, beginning to walk it out, living it out. So that's what I just love about Talent Smart. And then I want to just, Maggie, I've already told everybody what I think about you being a leader, but you often do this. I don't know if you intentionally do it but you often stop and say, and acknowledge where you grew up and your environment, your culture, and say, but I want to hear you all from your lens. And you do a wonderful job of just saying, here's my lens, but I also want to listen, be an active listener, and hear what your lens is, not to judge, not to guilt or shame, but just to have different perspectives. And I think that's what I love about Talent Smart, is just being open and welcoming other lenses and value and appreciating others' views.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, so the three of us are in our DEI committee, and this last meeting that both David and Greg are speaking to, I think, was such an interesting exploration in the reality of what it takes to stand up DEI in a real way. And I think for me, we've talked about this idea of lenses. So the more dissimilar you are from someone, the further away they are from you on certain spectrums, right? So the lens through which you look at someone, it tends to be your lens, your own lens. And so that creates these differences, it creates these, and for some people it creates barriers, it creates division. And I think sitting in spaces where you're having dialogue, and even if it's uncomfortable, sharing about your own experiences, sharing that things make you uncomfortable, sharing why they make you uncomfortable, each of those seconds and minutes and hours spent together builds a space of trust, so that when, at least for me, when I hear something that like irks me, or I think like, I don't love that, or that like, I have a question, like, why am I having a reaction to this? But I think this is a space of trust. These are people that I deeply respect and understand, that we are all rooting for one another. We are all rowing in the same direction for each other and for this business. And it allows us to lean into that discomfort, I think, in a way that in other spaces you might just ignore, or you might purposefully not move in that direction because it doesn't feel safe to do that. I think that's one big thing that I'm experiencing in this group is almost a welcoming of it being a little sticky, which I think is the way that you actually move it forward. So I love that.
Maggie, I just wanted to call out, there's a comment from Mike in the comments, which is great. Right on what we were just talking. You probably need that self-awareness to turn those hard, uncomfortable conversations into true communication to understand the disconnects. I think that's such a great call out, Mike, because we do have to do that. And you have to be able to step back sometimes and allow others to share, kind of like what Maggie was starting to say, their own perspective, and let it kind of, if you will, marinate with yourself, just to hear where they're coming from. So that it's not about, I always say that empathy and stepping into people's shoes isn't about agreeing, but it's at least understanding where they're coming from, so that I can move forward with a conversation with that too. So thank you, Mike, for that comment. I think that's right on.
Yeah, I love that. And I think what David just said, I think needs to be stressed. Listening does not equal agreement. And I think there is, especially right now, November of 2022, I think there is division in so many capacities and so across so many dimensions. And I think a lot of people have just said, I disagree so fervently with whatever it is that you believe that I can't even stay in this space to listen. And I think for me, like listening is where it starts.
Yeah.
If we can't listen, if I can't try to understand where you're coming from and why, like what are the beliefs and the values that sit underneath the things that you're saying, if I can't find a way to look for the similarities and the humanness, there's almost no way for us to take steps, even small steps forward. But it does require courage, and it requires putting yourself in hard situations where you're listening to things that might really impact you, that might really, create emotions and feelings that are difficult for you to withstand. And I think part of the journey is recognizing that the journey is hard and is long. And I think, over the years, they've done a lot of research on DEI initiatives, and a lot of them have failed over time. And part of that is because if done incorrectly, they're seen as static, sort of like, we're going to teach you this thing and then we've checked that box and then we're good to go. And the problem is, when you talk about some of these topics about bias and about allyship and about racism, you kick up a bunch of emotional dust, you kick up, experiences, and it brings into play a lot of, what has happened inside an organization, what's happened for people outside of that organization. And if you don't create spaces for people to actually talk about that experience and figure out what to do with that and figure out how to make it work for them in the business, then it can get in your way even more. And so I would say, part of what we try to do at Talent Smart is to figure out how to give you the tools and the skills with emotional intelligence, so that is a vehicle through which you can have DEI actually help you improve your organizations, top down and bottom up.
I just wanted to add into that. We've been talking about DEI as a journey, and I think that it's really about allowing yourself to say, we may have come up with this plan so far, but it can change and it should evolve because the world continues to evolve. So I think that you've got to revisit where you are in your DEI strategy, your mission, and be able to say, what's important now? What has changed out there, so that we make sure that we're continuing to be on top of things too. And that becomes uncomfortable because I think sometimes people want to create a mission or a strategy and say, okay, we got that. Let's put it up on the wall and let's hit the next tab. And it can't be that way. It's got to be something that's a little bit more fluid.
Yeah. Great. And I think so often, sometimes organizations are so focused on telling people what to say, do, think, and feel when it comes to DEI, rather than telling and being persuasive on a particular topic. I love what we've been talking about and what's in the chat box on listening, and asking and listening is more important than telling and persuading, as an individual and as an organization. And even, Brene Brown talks about empathy in a different way, and a new lens on empathy is not just walking in someone else's shoes, but rather walking in your shoes and then needing to learn how to listen to their story. And even if you haven't walked in their shoes, just believing and understanding and appreciating that person's experience. She wrote that definition in Atlas of the Heart. And I think that's so important. There are times when we are able to walk in someone's shoes because of our experiences and our backgrounds and those things. But there are also times when you're not able to walk in someone else's shoes, and you just have to be a good listener. And I learned this week from doing an activity at Talent Smart that listening isn't as easy as you think. And then we all have our own experiences when we listen. We listen, I'm a fixer. So most of the times when you're talking, I'm already trying to figure out answers. What do you want? What questions to ask? And my wife is 31 years of marriage is so powerful because she'll look at me. I'm gonna look at all of y'all in your eyes, and she'll say, honey, I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to listen. Wow, is that so freeing? Maybe we need to say to organizations and CEOs and DEI, chief DEI folk, that I don't need you to fix it. Our politicians, we just need everyone to listen. Wow. And I think that could just be so powerful in our organizations, our companies, and with our relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Any advice for people wherever they are on sort of their DEI journey, strategy and efforts wise? How can EQ help them elevate sort of what they have? Greg, what would you say?
So I'm just going to give you my perspective. Again, this is my lens, and this is the way I do it. You know, sometimes I have people that are in my circle, that are in my peer group, and they'll say to me, because they know I do work in the DEI space, and just keeping it real, they say, you need to go into those companies and you need to tell them how it is with DEI. You need to just give it to them. And I'll say, then how many doors do you think I'll get in? Mm-hmm. How many conversations do you think I'll have? Or how many times do you think people will just go like this and just shut me out? I know my hands are disappearing on the screen, but they shut you out. So sometimes I'll talk about DEI from a different perspective, and I'll talk about blind spots, belief systems, and brain systems. And what that is EQ, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Mm-hmm. It's so powerful how you could talk about race, you could talk about all kinds of things by coming to the table and laying self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management on the table, mm-hmm. versus those words that
you're the problem.
Yeah, you're the problem, judging and all. So I just love it from that perspective. That's why I think the EQ is the differentiator, mm-hmm. and how we do it, because we don't just provide the what, we provide the how. And that's those 66 that come with it. So that's just the way I look at it, and just coming at it from I'm gonna call it a soft perspective, but it's hard because you're really having the tough conversations and leaning into them.
Yeah. David, what about you?
Yeah, I think, first of all, you've got to just be willing to have the uncomfortable conversations. But I think first, we kind of said it before, take a breath and dive in. I think that what's helpful is when people say, we're going to have this conversation, set some boundaries, set some respectful boundaries, meaning to say, when it gets heated, we're going to go ahead and take that breath, and we're going to maybe take a break and walk away, but come back and don't ignore the disconnects that maybe are at the table, because that's really the meat of what you're talking about. I think the other thing, we have a strategy in relationship management that is about be open and curious. And that is such a powerful one when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that you can be open to ask the questions. Help me understand why that is for you. Help me understand your journey. Why do you have that perspective? Because that's going to be just the sweet spot of everybody understanding each other more. Even in the conversations that Greg and we've had a lot of conversations about DEI, we will look at each other and say, there's a lot of similarity into what we have gone through in growing up, him as a Black man, me as a gay man. But he's Black and I'm white and I'm a gay man. And so those things aren't the same, but yes, there's a lot of things that are happening. So I think you got to be able to bring those to the table. So I think when you're talking about strategies for an organization, start somewhere and allow yourself to have those uncomfortable conversations and be respectful of each other.
Yeah, I love that. And I love Monica has been adding wonderful things into the chat. If you haven't seen that, go and read all of them. But this last one is this idea of EQ discovery is also a proactive approach. And I think the two things that I would say that we've used in our DEI work here at Talent Smart that I think are really helpful are oops and ouch, and calling people in versus calling people out. So, we've talked about some of these conversations are hard because you're saying things that maybe you haven't thought of through someone else's lens. So you hear them through your own experience, but it can be hard to get feedback if you've never said it aloud to a group. And so what we've said, from a ground rules perspective from the beginning is, we want the best for each other. We want the best for this work, but it's possible that we're going to say things that are oops, and it's possible that we're going to say something that hurts somebody, an ouch, right? And so the proactive part of EQ from that perspective is give feedback. right? That we are soliciting and providing feedback to one another about how we're speaking to one another and about these topics, so that we can continuously learn and understand and get more curious, both about what we think and about what others think. The other thing too is, you know, inclusivity is about including everyone, right? And so I think this idea of calling people in versus calling them out. So instead of saying, you know, you're a problem for these reasons, it's about, you know, I need for you to be in this conversation and to understand that potentially having us all in this conversation is really tricky, and figuring out what that looks like moving forward. But I think those are two sort of proactive approaches that we've used. So again, we could have this conversation for 45 more hours. We have just run out of time. And really quickly, any last thoughts, Greg or David, that you want to share with our listeners before we sign off?
David?
Good.
Well, I just want to say thank you all for joining us today. And just remember, it is a journey. And wherever you are, just start there. And, you know, EQ is like the roots. It's like the roots of a tree. And when you deal with the roots, then the fruit that comes is the outcome of that. So just start with the roots, those 4 EQ skills, and start where you are. And I think life will be so much more where we can come together and have great conversations when we do that.
You have such a great way of putting those into words. I love that, Greg. I could listen to Greg all the time because I think for me, you know, I think about what we do when we don't feel safe at work from a DEI perspective. We spend way more energy not bringing our full self to work, as opposed to being as productive as we can. You know, I'll share my journey early on. You know, as a gay man, not until 10 years ago did I finally come out at work and felt like I could bring my full self. Now, that doesn't mean that friends didn't know when I was at work, but that's a long journey before that I was protecting who I was, because I was always afraid of, I don't know if that's going to be okay. I don't know if that's going to be career limiting. So, Greg and I had this conversation one time. He can't do that because he's Black. He can't hide that. I could hide that I was gay, but it was difficult as well. So even still, anybody who is in any sort of group that happens to be visually a minority, you still are going to protect yourself. And so I think, and the same thing with women. So I think that it's one of the things that we've got to, in the workplace, to understand that people are spending a lot of energy and time not being themselves and not sharing their perspective if they don't feel safe at work. And so a great, robust D&I strategy and mission can just help you all around, and you stop with the let's make people not feel safe there and let them bring their full selves to work. Again, it goes back to we don't have to agree with all the points that you bring up, but at least we understand where you're coming from. So thank you for that. And let's go. Yeah. And thanks for everybody who's been putting comments in here. Really have enjoyed reading them. And Maggie, I work for Maggie as well. So I need to start saying some really nice things about Maggie, since Greg just cornered the marker on that. But I will just say one last thing is that it helps whenever your leadership embraces and encourages the conversation.
Yes.
It is not one of those things that you can't say, well, we're going to talk about it when we're in that meeting.
Yeah.
Because that's not right. You cannot do that. And so I have often conversations with Maggie about this topic, and Greg and I have had it. And so I think when that's the landscape of your company, boy, you are on the right journey.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the last thing that I think I would just add, echoing what David shared, is DE&I, like EQ, is not something extra. It's a vehicle through which to do your work better, so that everybody can see themselves in that organization and in the work. And so I think my advice would be start small. Try and think about the things that you've already have built inside your organization, and how you might weave EQ and DEI conversations into the conversations that are already happening, so that it doesn't feel like something extra. It just starts to feel like part of the fabric of the way you do your work. So with that, thank you both for joining. I really appreciate it. To all of our listeners, be sure to join us in December, and we're going to be exploring the topic of embracing EQ for better health. So excited to have that conversation and to have you back. Until then, keep checking our content here at LinkedIn